The studio lights burned bright, casting a warm glow over the familiar set of The Kelly Clarkson Show. The audience buzzed with anticipation, their chatter a low hum as they waited for the taping to begin. Kelly Clarkson, all smiles and Texas charm, stood backstage, adjusting her earpiece while her team darted around, finalizing details. Today's guest was Blake Shelton, country music's golden boy, known for his quick wit and laid-back demeanor. The two had a history, of course, from their days sparring playfully on The Voice, where their chemistry was undeniable. Fans loved their banter, the way Kelly's infectious laugh paired with Blake's sly grins. It was supposed to be an easy episode, a nostalgic reunion of sorts, with Blake promoting his new album and maybe a few lighthearted jabs about their coaching days. But the air backstage felt heavier than usual, like a storm brewing just out of sight. Kelly had heard whispers. Before the show, Blake was in a mood. Her producer had warned, something about a rough week on the road. She brushed it off. Blake was always a pro, and their friendship could handle a little tension. Still, as she glanced at him across the stage, warming up, with a coffee in hand, there was a sharpness in his eyes she didn't recognize. He wasn't joking with the crew like he usually did, his usual charm replaced by a quiet intensity. Kelly shook it off, chalking it up to exhaustion. She had her own pressures. After all, the show was her baby, and every episode had to hit the right notes, especially with a guest as big as Blake. The audience was expecting fireworks, the fun kind, and she was determined to deliver. The show kicked off smoothly enough. Kelly's opening monologue landed well, her jokes about her latest obsession with baking bread drawing laughs from the crowd. She introduced Blake with her usual warmth, calling him her favorite cowboy and teasing him about his latest fishing obsession. The audience roared as Blake sauntered out, all denim and swagger, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He settled into the guest chair, and for a moment, everything felt normal. They swapped stories about their time on The Voice. Kelly poking fun at Blake's competitive streak, him firing back with a quip about her karaoke skills. The audience ate it up, but there was an edge to Blake's tone, a bite that felt sharper than playful. Kelly noticed it, her smile tightening, just a fraction, but she kept the energy high, steering the conversation toward his new album. Then it happened. During a commercial break, as the crew adjusted lighting and the audience chatted, Blake leaned over, his voice low but cutting. He made a comment about Kelly's recent comments in an interview, something about her saying she'd outgrown the reality TV world that made her famous. It wasn't a throwaway line, it felt personal, like he'd been stewing on it. Kelly, caught off guard, laughed it off. But her response had a sting of its own, pointing out that not everyone wanted to stay in the same lane forever. The exchange was quick, barely noticed by the crew, but the tension lingered like a bad note. When the cameras rolled again, the easy rhythm was gone. Blake's answers were clipped, his jokes landing flat. Kelly tried to keep things light, but her questions started to feel like probes. Each one met with a deflection or a subtle jab. By the time they got to the segment where Blake was supposed to perform a stripped-down version of his new single, the atmosphere was electric, but not in the way anyone hoped. The audience could sense it, their applause hesitant. Kelly introduced the song with her usual enthusiasm, but as Blake picked up his guitar, he muttered something under his breath. Too quiet for the mics to catch, but loud enough for Kelly to hear. Her smile froze, and for a split second, the camera caught a flash of something in her eyes, hurt, maybe anger. The performance went fine, technically, but it lacked the soul Blake was known for. The audience clapped, but the energy was off. Backstage, as the show cut to another break, Kelly pulled her producer aside, her voice tight. Something had to give, she said. She wasn't sure what had gotten into Blake, but this wasn't the reunion she'd signed up for. The commercial break ended, and the studio lights flared back to life, signaling the return to live taping. Kelly Clarkson, ever the professional, plastered on a smile as she faced the audience. Her voice bright but her eyes guarded. Blake Shelton sat across from her, his posture rigid, the guitar now resting against the chair. The audience, still buzzing from the performance, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent of tension, but the crew wasn't. Stagehands exchanged glances, sensing the shift. The next segment was supposed to be a fun game, a fan-favorite bit where Kelly and her guests answered rapid-fire questions from the audience, designed to spark laughter and camaraderie. But as the segment began, it was clear the playful vibe was slipping away. Kelly launched into the game with her usual energy, pulling a question from a fan in the front row who asked about the funniest moment from their Voice days. She recounted a story about Blake sneaking a goat into the studio as a prank, expecting him to jump in with his side of the tale. Instead, he gave a curt nod, muttering something about how things were simpler back then. The audience chuckled, but Kelly's laugh was strained, her eyes flicking to him for a beat too long. She pivoted to the next question, this one about Blake's songwriting process. He answered, but his words were clipped, almost dismissive, as if he'd rather be anywhere else. The audience's energy dipped, their applause polite but lacking. The earlier warmth. Kelly, sensing the segment faltering, tried to steer it back with a lighthearted jab, asking if Blake's grumpiness was because he hadn't caught any fish lately. The crowd laughed, but Blake's response was sharp, saying he didn't need fishing tips from someone who probably couldn't bait a hook. The comment landed like a slap, the audience's laughter turning to murmurs. Kelly's smile wavered, but she recovered quickly, tossing back a quip about how she'd rather grill a steak than catch one. The exchange was playful on the surface, but the crew could feel the ice beneath it. The game continued, but each question seemed to widen the gap between them. Their banter less like old friends and more like opponents circling each other. Behind the scenes, the producer was sweating, the show's rhythm was off, and social media was already lighting up with clips from earlier segments, fans speculating about the tension. During the next break, Kelly pulled Blake aside, her voice low but firm. She asked him point blank what was going on, why he was acting like he had a chip on his shoulder. Blake's response was gruff, saying he didn't appreciate being painted as the guy who never grew up, stuck in some reality TV bubble. Kelly's eyes narrowed. She hadn't meant to hit a nerve, but his words felt like an accusation. She told him to save it for after the show, that they had a job to do. He nodded, but his jaw was tight, and as they returned to their marks, the air felt thick with unspoken words. The final segment was a cooking challenge, a staple of Kelly's show where guests joined her in making something simple, usually a recipe tied to their roots. Today, it was supposed to be a nod to their shared Southern heritage, a barbecue dish they'd both hyped up in pre-show interviews. As the crew wheeled out the cooking station, Kelly tried to reset the mood, joking about how Blake probably thought his barbecue was better than hers. He smirked, but his reply was pointed, saying some people cared more about authenticity than showbiz flair. The audience laughed, thinking it was part of the act, but Kelly's grip on the spatula tightened. The cooking started, but their usual chemistry was gone. Blake barely engaged, tossing ingredients into the mix with little enthusiasm, while Kelly overcompensated, her chatter filling the awkward silences. By the time the dish was done, the audience was still clapping, but the vibe was off. Kelly wrapped the segment with her trademark warmth, thanking Blake for coming and promising the audience more fun after the break. But as the cameras cut, she turned away from him, her smile dropping. Blake lingered for a moment, then headed backstage without a word. The producer rushed to Kelly's side, asking if they needed to adjust the next segment. She shook her head, her voice quiet but resolute. They'd finished the show, she said, but something had to change before things spiraled further. The cameras were off, and the studio dimmed for another commercial break. But the tension between Kelly Clarkson and Blake Shelton hung heavy in the air. The audience, sensing something amiss, whispered among themselves, their excitement now tinged with curiosity. Backstage, Kelly stood with her arms crossed, her producer hovering nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Blake had retreated to a corner, scrolling through his phone, his face unreadable but his posture stiff. The crew moved quickly, resetting the set for the next segment, a Q&A with fans submitted through social media. It was meant to be a light, fan-driven moment, a chance for Kelly and Blake to reconnect with their audience and each other. But the earlier exchanges had left a mark, and the idea of them playing nice felt like a tall order. Kelly took a deep breath, smoothing her expression as she returned to the stage. She was a pro, and the show was her domain. She wasn't about to let Blake's mood derail it. As the director counted them back in, she flashed her signature smile, welcoming the audience back and introducing the Q&A with her usual warmth. Blake joined her, his charm dialed up just enough to pass as engaged, but his eyes were distant. The first question came from a fan asking about their favorite memories working together. Kelly jumped in, sharing a story about late-night voice rehearsals, her voice bright but careful. Blake nodded along, adding a brief anecdote, but his tone lacked the usual spark. The audience clapped, but the energy felt forced, like everyone was waiting for something to break. The next question was bolder, a fan asking if they ever clashed on The Voice over their coaching styles. Kelly laughed, trying to keep it light, saying they bickered like siblings but always had each other's backs. Blake's response was different. He leaned forward, his voice low and pointed, saying sometimes people forget where they came from when they're chasing new spotlights. The audience murmured, unsure if it was a joke, but Kelly's smile tightened. She countered, saying growth doesn't mean forgetting your roots, her words sharp but cloaked in humor. The exchange was quick, but it landed like a spark on dry grass. The crew exchanged nervous glances, and the producer signaled to move to the next question. Things took a turn with a question about Blake's new album, specifically a lyric that seemed to shade reality TV culture. The fan asked if it was a dig at The Voice, and Blake didn't hesitate. He said the song was about staying true to yourself, not chasing clout on someone else's stage. The audience gasped, sensing the jab, and Kelly's face flushed. She didn't miss a beat, though, saying some stages lift everyone up, not just the ones holding the mic. The crowd cheered, but the air crackled with tension. Blake's smirk was back, but it wasn't playful, it was defiant. The Q&A continued, but each question seemed to pull them further apart, their answers less about the fans and more about settling a score. By the segment's end, the audience was riveted, but not for the right reasons. Social media was exploding, clips of their exchanges going viral, fans dissecting every word. Backstage, during the next break, Kelly's producer pulled her aside, asking if they should cut the final segment, a duet they'd planned as a nostalgic nod to their voice days. Kelly hesitated, her jaw tight. She wanted to push through, to prove she could handle it, but Blake's attitude was wearing her down. She told the producer to keep it in, but to have a backup plan. Meanwhile, Blake was with his team, brushing off their concerns, saying he was just being honest, but his team knew better. This wasn't just a bad day. Something deeper was at play, and it was about to spill over. As the crew prepped for the duet, Kelly and Blake stood on opposite sides of the stage, barely acknowledging each other. The audience, unaware of the full extent of the rift, was buzzing with anticipation for the performance. The song was one they'd sung together years ago, a crowd pleaser meant to close the show on a high note. But as the music queued up, and they stepped toward their mics, the weight of the day hung between them. A silent challenge neither seemed ready to back down from. The stage was set for the duet, the final act of the Kelly Clarkson show, and the audience leaned forward, their anticipation palpable. The lights softened, casting a warm glow over Kelly Clarkson and Blake Shelton as they stood at their microphones. The opening chords of their old voice duet filling the studio. It was a song that had once defined their friendship, a soulful country ballad that showcased their voices blending effortlessly. But tonight, as the music swelled, there was no trace of that old chemistry. Kelly's voice carried its usual power, rich and emotive, but Blake's was restrained, almost mechanical, as if he were singing from a distance. The audience, caught up in the melody, didn't notice at first, but the crew did. The director's eyes darted between them. Sensing trouble, Kelly poured herself into the performance, her eyes fixed on the audience, avoiding Blake's gaze. She hit every note with precision, her passion a silent rebuke to the tension that had built all day. Blake, for his part, sang with technical skill, but his delivery lacked heart. Halfway through the song, during a moment when their voices were supposed to harmonize, Blake's timing slipped, his note clashing with hers. The audience winced, and Kelly's jaw tightened, but she powered through, her voice soaring to cover the mistake. The crowd applauded, thinking it was a minor glitch, but backstage, the producer was on edge, whispering to the sound team to be ready for anything. As the song ended, the audience rose to their feet, clapping enthusiastically. But the air between Kelly and Blake was ice. Kelly turned to him, expecting the usual post-performance hug or at least a nod of acknowledgement. But Blake just stepped back, wiping his brow and looking away. The cameras caught it, the moment lingering awkwardly as Kelly's smile faltered. She recovered quickly, thanking the audience and transitioning to a quick plug for Blake's album. Her voice, professional but strained. The director called for a commercial break, and the stage darkened, the audience's chatter rising as they sensed something was off. Backstage, the tension exploded. Kelly followed Blake to the green room, her patience finally snapping. She demanded to know what his problem was, why he'd been picking fights all day. Her voice was low but fierce, years of friendship giving her the right to call him out. Blake didn't back down, his tone sharp as he accused her of acting like she was above their shared past, like the voice was some stepping stone she'd outgrown. Kelly shot back, saying she'd never disrespected their history, but she wasn't going to stay stuck in it either. The argument escalated, their voices rising until a stagehand poked their head in, reminding them the mics were still hot. They froze, realizing the audience might have heard snippets through the studio's sound system. The producer rushed in, trying to defuse the situation, but the damage was done. Social media was already ablaze with leaked audio clips, fans speculating about the heated clash they'd overheard. Kelly, visibly shaken, told her team to prep for the show's closing without Blake. She wasn't sure what that meant yet, but she couldn't let the episode end on this note. Blake, meanwhile, grabbed his jacket, telling his team he was done. His manager tried to reason with him, saying walking out would only make things worse, but Blake was past listening. He headed for the exit, leaving the crew scrambling to adjust. As the final segment loomed, Kelly stood alone backstage, her mind racing. The show had to go on, but the idea of facing the audience without addressing the elephant in the room felt impossible. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. She'd built this show on authenticity, and she wasn't about to let Blake's exit derail it. The director signaled that they were 30 seconds from going live, and Kelly nodded, stepping toward the stage, her heart pounding but her head high. The studio lights snapped back on, signaling the return from the final commercial break. Kelly Clarkson stood center stage, her smile steady but her eyes carrying the weight of the day. The audience, unaware of the full chaos backstage, clapped enthusiastically, expecting the usual warm wrap-up. Blake Shelton was nowhere to be seen, his absence a glaring void where the guest chair sat empty. The crew had scrambled to adjust, removing his name from the teleprompter and prepping Kelly to carry the closing segment solo. Social media was a firestorm now, with fans posting about the overheard argument and Blake's abrupt exit trending under hashtags speculating about a feud. Kelly could feel the eyes of the audience, curious and searching. But she wasn't about to let the show crumble. She launched into the closing segment with her trademark grit, thanking the audience for their energy and diving into a quick story about a fan who'd sent her a heartfelt letter. Her voice was warm, but there was a steel behind it, a determination to reclaim the narrative. She didn't mention Blake directly, but her words carried an edge, emphasizing how the show was about connection, not competition. The audience leaned in, sensing the subtext, their applause louder than before, as if rallying behind her. The crew watched in awe. Kelly was turning a potential disaster into a moment of raw authenticity, her ability to read the room unmatched. Backstage, the producer was fielding frantic calls from the network, who'd caught wind of the viral clips, and wanted answers. The leaked audio from the green room argument was everywhere, with fans dissecting Blake's jab about Kelly outgrowing her roots and her sharp retort about moving forward. The producer knew they couldn't ignore it entirely, but Kelly had been clear, no direct acknowledgement on air. Instead, she pivoted to a surprise performance, announcing she'd sing a song from her own catalog, one she hadn't planned to perform. It was a power move, a way to close the show on her terms. The band scrambled to cue up the track, a soulful ballad about resilience. And Kelly took the mic, her voice filling the studio with a raw intensity that silenced any lingering whispers. The performance was electric, Kelly pouring every ounce of her frustration and strength into the lyrics. The audience was on its feet, some visibly emotional, as she hit the final note. The applause was deafening, a release of the tension that had built all day. She thanked the crowd, her smile genuine now, and signed off with her usual warmth, promising to see them next time. As the cameras cut, the studio erupted in cheers, the crew joining in. Their respect for her deepened by how she'd handled the chaos. Kelly stepped off stage, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. But her mind was already racing toward the aftermath. Outside, Blake was in his car, his team urging him to release a statement before the narrative spiraled further. He was quiet, his earlier fire replaced by a grim realization that he'd crossed a line. The argument hadn't been planned, but his frustration, fueled by personal pressures and a bruised ego, had boiled over. He knew walking out was a mistake, but pride kept him from turning back. Social media was unforgiving, with fans split, some defending his honesty, others slamming him for disrespecting Kelly's stage. The producer, meanwhile, was in damage control mode, coordinating with the network to manage the fallout while ensuring the episode could air without major edits. Kelly, back in her dressing room, sat with her team, debriefing. She was calm but resolute, refusing to let the incident define her show. She instructed her team to focus on the positive, highlighting the performance and fan support in their social media posts. But privately, she was hurt, the sting of Blake's words lingering. She'd thought their friendship was stronger than this. As the crew packed up, whispers spread about what would happen next. Whether Blake would apologize or if this was the end of their public camaraderie. The dust settled in the hours after the taping of the Kelly Clarkson show, but the storm online only grew louder. Kelly Clarkson sat in her dressing room, the adrenaline of her final performance fading, replaced by a quiet resolve. Her team buzzed around her, drafting posts to highlight the episode's high points, carefully avoiding any mention of Blake Shelton's absence. The audience had left the studio, their chatter now fueling a frenzy on social media, where clips of the tense moments and leaked audio of the backstage argument were dissected relentlessly. Hashtags like Clarkson v. Shelton and Blake walks out trended, with fans picking sides, some praising Kelly's grace under pressure, others speculating about what pushed Blake to the edge. The narrative was slipping out of control, and both stars knew the next moves would matter. Kelly, sipping water and scrolling through her phone, saw the flood of support from fans but also the questions about what had happened. She wasn't one to air personal grievances publicly, but the hurt lingered, not just from Blake's words but from the way he'd chosen to leave. She called her producer, her voice steady, and laid out a plan. The show would air as taped, no cuts to hide the tension. It was raw, real, and her audience deserved that honesty. She'd address the fallout indirectly in the next episode, focusing on moving forward rather than dwelling on the clash. Her team nodded, impressed by her clarity, and set to work ensuring the episode's release would lean into her strength, not the drama. Meanwhile, Blake was back at his hotel, his phone lighting up with messages from his team and industry friends, urging him to get ahead of the story. His manager pushed for a quick statement, something to cool the heat, but Blake was conflicted. Part of him wanted to double down, to stand by his frustration about being seen as the guy who never evolved. But another part, quieter, regretted how it all went down. He'd always respected Kelly, admired her hustle, and the personal jab he'd thrown wasn't who he wanted to be. After a long silence, he agreed to a brief post on social media. Not an apology, but a vague acknowledgement of a rough day, thanking fans for their support and promising to keep focusing on his music. It was calculated, meant to calm without conceding, but it didn't land well. Fans called it dismissive, and the divide online deepened. The episode aired a few days later, and the response was electric. Viewers praised Kelly's handling of the situation, her solo performance becoming a viral moment of empowerment. Critics lauded her for turning a potential disaster into a showcase of her resilience, with some even saying it was one of her strongest episodes. The tension with Blake, though, is the talk of the internet, with entertainment blogs running headlines about the heated clash and speculating about their friendship's future. Some insiders claimed the rift was deeper than one bad day, pointing to years of subtle competition from their voice days, while others believed it was a momentary flare-up, amplified by the public eye. Kelly, true to her word, addressed the incident in her next show, not by naming Blake, but by talking about the importance of showing up, even when things get messy. Her words resonated, and the audience roared in support, cementing her as the one who'd come out stronger. Blake, meanwhile, stayed quiet, focusing on his tours and avoiding talk shows for the time being. His team monitored the fallout, knowing the industry was watching. Some fans hoped for a reconciliation, a moment where the two could laugh it off like old times, but others wondered if the bridge was too damaged. The clash had revealed cracks, not just in their dynamic but in how each navigated their place in a changing industry. As the weeks passed, the story faded from the headlines, but it left a mark. Kelly's show continued to thrive, her authenticity drawing even more fans. Blake's album did well, but the incident lingered in how people saw him, a reminder that even the biggest stars could stumble. The studio lights would keep shining, the cameras would roll again, but that day on Kelly's set, when words turned sharp and a friendship faltered, became a story neither could fully leave behind.